Hi. We're continuing our discussions about the fundamentals of Islam. In our prior tapes, we talked a lot about what do Muslims believe, what is Muslim theology. We're going to continue with a little bit of that, but also talk a little bit more about modern Islam and the post 9/11 experience for Muslims in America with our esteemed guest and my friend Abdullah Antepli. This session is taking place at the very beginning of the holy month of Ramadan, and
That's
I
true.
want to wish my friend Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you very much,
And
Ramadan Kareem.
and may your fast be easy and fruitful.
Easy is the good one, yes. Fasting in the summer for about 18 hours is not always fun.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll understand why if you get a scratchy voice and you don't take a drink of water, we'll understand why.
And my dry mouth.
Well, we're going to start with a difficult topic, and
Yeah.
that is the one of jihad.
Right.
Jihad is a concept that you find in the Holy Quran.
Mm-hmm.
It's mentioned numerous times, and in fact, there's different conceptions or ideas behind jihad, about it personal and also more about geopolitical concept. Why don't you explain those to us?
Jihad is one of the most contentious and unfortunately most corrupted Muslim terms or Islamic terms in the post 9/11 United States. It's an essential part of Islam. Like Muslims cannot afford to lose or wipe out the concept of jihad from the Islamic theology. It is embedded in the day-to-day living of any believing, practicing Muslim. As you said, it's mentioned in the Quran, exemplified in the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad. Jihad literally means striving. Jihad literally means working against all evil, all negative forces in your life, and striving to be a better person, striving to excel, to be a more ethical, moral human being. In the words of Prophet Muhammad, there are two different types of jihad. In one of the most critical battles, which was a survival battle, Uhud, the second battle that he was involved in the self-defense, he engaged with the Meccans who attacked them to kill them all. He came across victorious, he survived. And when people were feeling good about it, at the entrance of his city, imagine this picture. He basically said, what you feel good about the battle that we survived, that was the smaller jihad. That was the lesser jihad. That was the less important secondary jihad. Now that we are victorious, we came back, now we have the responsibility to form an ethical, moral society, individually and collectively. That's the bigger jihad. It's a very famous saying of the Prophet Muhammad. We came from smaller jihad. For many people, it was the jihad, because if they were to lose completely, there was no Islam today. Islam could have been wiped out completely. But for him, that was the physical jihad. It was the smaller one. But coming back and forming and building and establishing an ethical, moral society was the bigger jihad. And that's exactly the way in which the jihad played out and built as a theology in the Muslim world. So I wouldn't deny that there's a physical aspect of jihad. Yes, in the form of self-defense, if you've been attacked individually or as a nation, unjustly and unfairly, you are allowed to use lesser jihad to basically fight against the people who are invading you or chasing you out of your country or killing you or your loved ones, etc. But for many people, that doesn't happen. For many people, jihad is basically the internal struggle on a day-to-day basis for every decision that you make. That's when you engage in the real jihad. Am I being ethical? Am I being authentic? Am I being truthful? Am I being righteous, etc.? When I went to Las Vegas, I have to tell this, you heard this story before, for the first time. At the Las Vegas airport, I don't know if it's still there, you get out of the plane, you walk towards the baggage claim. There's a huge sign. There's a huge sign. First of all, they say, welcome to the Sin City. And then there's a huge sign saying, submit yourself to your temptations. You know, as someone who's engaged in this big jihad on a day-to-day basis every day, when I saw this sign, I was speechless for a couple of seconds. Jihad is exactly, in the mathematical, just don't do that. Don't submit yourself to your temptations. Don't submit yourself to your carnal desires. Always strive to be a better person, better human being.
So this notion of the lesser jihad, the physical jihad, is that in some ways a Quranic principle, a duty upon Muslims to rise up to strike against injustice? Is it just injustice against Muslim people in Muslim territory?
That's an excellent question. Actually, it's not a duty, it's a permission. And these are two very different. And for the first 13 years of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, the lesser jihad was not permitted. They were not allowed to engage in war while they were in Mecca. Only after in Medina, when they were able to form the city, the verse says you are permitted to fight against the people who took you out of your cities, who confiscated your land, etc. It's a permission. It's not an obligation per se. Of course, justice is an obligation. Of course, establishing justice is an obligation. But lesser jihad or fighting, a physical fight, is not the only way to do that. We are permitted. Muslims are permitted. Islam is by all means not a pacifist or like a non-violent religion in the early Christian sense. There is no such concept. But it's a chronic term which we are permitted in certain conditions. But again, that lesser jihad can only be declared or initiated by the legitimate Muslim governments. It cannot be initiated by individuals. I cannot declare a jihad. Osama bin Laden cannot declare a jihad. The organizations on their own cannot declare a jihad. It has to be a legitimate political government who can declare this lesser jihad.
Well, let's move to the critics of Islam. Sure. They argue that a much more aggressive, offensive sense of a use of force is justified, is set forth actually in the Quran. They even make this argument, and I think they point most famously to the famous what some people call the sword verses in the Quran. But let me just read them, and we'll put them up for our students to read. The first starts, "Fight in the way of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress. Indeed, Allah does not like transgressors." Then it goes on, the next verse, it says, "And kill them wherever you overtake them, and expel them from wherever they have expelled you. And fitna is worse than killing. And do not fight them at al-Masjid al-Haram until they fight you there. But if they fight you, then kill them. Such is the recompense of the disbelievers." Now, many take these verses to say that well, this is saying a very aggressive stance, especially towards infidels, non-believers. How do you respond to that?
And these are not the only ones.
Yes,
there are in chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 9. If you go, there are so many of those verses as well. But it's really interesting. These critiques of Islam and those marginal radicals in the Muslim, as if they graduated from the same school. It's really interesting. The way
they read the same way.
They read the exact same verses in the exact same way. As if the entire Quran is only these verses, and as if they can only be read in such a literal meaning, taking one verse of the Quran and basically taking completely out of context and building a whole theology of it. Well, we don't read as the entire Muslim history is the witness. Muslims do not necessarily read or engage with Quran in this way. The entire Quran was revealed in the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad in 23 years. And most of its verses were in response to what was going on in the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. So a brief explanation, brief common sense that I will bring to these verses. So these verses were revealed during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Well, he was engaging war with the people of Mecca, who were basically hostile towards Prophet Muhammad from the beginning, who were trying to wipe them and his religion from the face of earth. So these verses has a context. When we read Quran, we read the very same reasons of these revelations revealed to Prophet Muhammad. We have in our tradition the picture of the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad, what was going on in the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. So to take these Islamic critics of Islam to their own words, if Muslims were religiously, theologically, basically commanded to take this jihad towards any non-believers throughout the history, we had many opportunities. We had so many different opportunities to do this, to take this wherever we go. That's absolutely not true. If you think the entire 1400 years of Muslim history, Muslims were chasing non-Muslims and engaging in this kind of hostile, violent, and somewhat barbaric reactions, there would be no Muslims in the Muslim world. Well, if you see, after 1400 years of presence in Egypt, in Syria, Lebanon. There's a significant number of non-Muslim minorities in that part of the world. I mean, that in itself is a living. Islam was in India for 800 years as a hegemonic, powerful, ruling elite, so as in Spain. Muslims never understood these verses. This is similar to going back to Christian Bible or Jewish Bible, taking these Joshua's entrance to the Holy Land verses and basically saying this is the entire Judaism, this is the entire Christianity. What I would say is this is just basically, as these critics and the people like Osama bin Laden and other radicals, this is the perversion and distortion of the beautiful message of Islam, taking these few verses and basically taking them completely out of context.
So what is the message of the Quran in terms of how non-believers, non-Muslims ought to be treated, whether they live in Muslim lands or whether Muslims are living as minorities in other lands? Actually,
if you read 2 verses before these verses and 2 verses after those verses, there's a clean explanation and answer to your question. God says, don't engage in war. Peace is better. God loves the peacemakers, but only if they attack you, if only they destroy you, if only they sort of poses a threat to you and to your community. Then engage in war and jihad in these just ethic, moral manners. Only then, but even in the middle of that war, if they choose the path of peace, you should also choose the path of peace, since God loves those who are peacemakers, etc. The Quran itself is explaining that. The attitude, the Quranic attitude, the Muslim attitude to non-Muslims is they should be treated respectfully, they should be respected, their religious rights needs to be given to them, they should be able to practice their religion freely. These are not my words and claim. I mean, people can go, just compare the Jewish experience in the Muslim world and the Jewish experience and somewhere else, especially in the Christian Europe. It wasn't like necessarily rosy. It wasn't like the 21st century egalitarian equal society per se, but it's not even comparable. There is nothing close to Holocaust or Inquisition or Crusaders, nothing even close in that kind of either my religion or death or you have to leave. There were no such imposition of Islam to the religious minorities in the Muslim-dominated, Muslim-majority societies throughout the history.
Of course, what gives some credibility to some of these critics is that in many Muslim countries we are seeing persecution of religious minorities. But I take it your view is that this is certainly not consistent with Islam, but it's happening for political, cultural reasons, and some people are trying to use Islam and to justify what they're doing to minorities in the Sudan or in Egypt, where the Coptic Christians are oppressed.
And yes, and that's absolutely true, and also a very new phenomenon, like burning churches, attacking churches, basically persecuting religious minorities in this sense. What's happening despicably in Indonesia, in Pakistan, the government, the army is basically taking part in destroying religious houses of worship of other faith communities. This is absolutely an anomaly. There were fights and war, but the religious houses of worship, religious lands, the properties were always considered as sacred and respected throughout the history. It's a new phenomenon in a post-colonial sense.
Now, you said that the concept of jihad has been very much corrupted. Explain to us, I mean, bin Laden was an educated individual. He seems
not
to
in
be
Islamic studies. He was an engineer. He was educated in the Western institutions in the field of engineer. He did not have any formal religious or theological, any divinity school education from the Muslim world whatsoever.
Well, how did he stray so far from what the core teachings of Islam were, and how did he distort this concept of jihad to mean something, in his view, that justify the killing of innocents, of civilians, mostly in the West, but other civilian Muslims who he didn't think were practicing Islam in the way he thought it should be. So many thousands of Muslims have suffered from him as well. So how did he fall from that?
It's a $1 million question, but the answer is not in Islamic theology only. It wasn't his perverted, distorted understanding of Islamic theology, or it wasn't his only. I mean, it was part of it for sure. He basically represents the Muslim outrage and anger towards the last 200, 300 post-colonial experience of the Muslim civilization, decline and ultimate collapse. As the Muslim societies suffered centuries-long colonial oppression, and then the Muslim communities and societies continue to suffer in the hands of their own dictators in Egypt, in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, and other places. These are deeply broken societies with so much anger, and these people are sitting in piles of anger and frustration. So he basically took this anger, these social, political, economic problems of the Muslim world, and gave a religious language to that anger and rage and outrage. Since he himself was a distorted human being, so it wasn't a surprise that his approach to religion and his interpretation of religion through the lenses of the Muslim suffering and pain in different parts of the world. Of course, if the societies are healthy, if the societies are on their own feet, functioning economically, socially, culturally, of course, it reveals the best of their religion. It reveals the best of their worldview and civilization. But if the societies are basically completely failed and sick and unhealthy, of course, it reveals the worst of their religion. It reveals the worst of their worldview and ideology. And Osama bin Laden represents that worst of us. I cannot deny that he is a Muslim. I cannot deny that he is basically basing his evil ideology on the different interpretation of Quran. All I can say is this ideology is anomaly. It violates and contradicts the basic tenets of Islam, and it's an anomaly throughout the Islamic history as well.
Let me ask you about the term jihadists that's really become proliferated throughout the media. Just last month, President Obama, in an important speech, he said, deranged or alienated individuals, often U.S. citizens or legal residents, can do enormous damage, particularly when inspired by larger notions of violent jihad. How do you react to the use of this terminology in the media by politicians of all stripes?
Especially coming from President Obama, my reaction is a big, deep sigh and disappointment. I mean, he should have been better informed. He should have better speech writers. After all these years, after 9/11, his administration, his advisors, that are full-time Muslims working in the White House, suggesting and informing and consulting him in Islamic affairs. It's really an unfortunate statement to frame it in such a way that somehow there's a larger notion of jihad or some more. It even suggests that that's the real jihad. That's the real, the concepts of jihad. It's unfortunately very uninformed, and it's very misleading. If it comes from a Fox TV anchor or Fox TV news presenter, I understand where it's coming from. But coming from President Obama, I find it highly problematic, and I find it highly disappointed.
Well, Abdullah Antepli, thank you for telling us, informing us about the concept of jihad.
Thank you.